Open the special study session meeting of October 5th, 2020, and ask Jim to lead us through the items.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn it over pretty quickly to Ethan, who has some material that he's prepared to walk you through. This is a conversation that we've been having for the past several months about the opportunity zone that we have in San Rafael, which is in our Canal neighborhood, one census tract of our Canal neighborhood. And it's intended to bring in investment into the opportunity zone. So we were having a conversation in terms of if that were to take place and people are displaced, what are things that can be done to smooth that transition or to make that process better, so that it works out for our community and it's not just an investment vehicle. So with that as just a general background, we've been having some conversations about that, and we wanted to, in a study session format, again, there's no decisions that are made tonight, but we ultimately think that the council would like to see us bring an ordinance back to you in regular session for consideration. And we have some recommendations if you would like to see that, kind of what that would look like from our perspective. So what we were looking for tonight is to get your reactions to kind of what we put together so far, just informally, and then get any community input on it and take some direction from the council as to where you'd like to see us go from here on this particular topic. But Ethan, are you gonna kick us off here? And I think we also have Andrew Henning and Paul Jensen and did I see Nira? There she is. Nira for support as well.
I guess at this point, I'd like to make sure that we're on the same page. We're only talking about the opportunity zone within San Rafael, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I don't know, Ethan, if it's necessary, but there's some unique particularly tax features with regard to the opportunity zone. And since we have some in the public, you probably had planned to talk a little bit about it, but let's at least include some comments with regard to the tax consequences, because they are the driving force, and that's what's got me concerned about the consequences. So thanks, Jim, for the introduction. Nice job. Ethan, floor is yours.
All right. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So as Jim kind of mentioned, my plan is to keep it pretty high level. I'm happy to jump in wherever, but mostly it was to kind of facilitate more of a discussion, to talk some about kind of where we're going, some conversation around kind of what we want potential ordinance to look like, as well as the mayor just mentioned, to get a little bit more understanding about some of those tax implications that are results around an opportunity zone. So kind of jumping right into it, the opportunity zone in and of itself was created in 2017 under the U.S. Investing Opportunities Act, which was the 2017 kind of tax bill that got a lot of press. And ultimately what it did is it identified census tracts throughout the United States as opportunity zones. So we do have one, it's 112201, which is the area kind of right along Canal Street in the Canal neighborhood. Now, at a very high level, what the opportunity zone does is it provides a tax incentive for investing capital gains through what's known as an opportunity fund. Now, an opportunity fund is the actual investing portion of an opportunity zone, and it's where kind of the money flows through. Now, where the benefits to the investor comes in is that the longer an investor keeps their money in an opportunity fund, that investment, they'll get a larger tax break for those investments. So to kind of unpack that a little bit, ultimately, what an opportunity zone does is it says for an investor to get the tax break on their capital gains from an opportunity fund investment is they need to put in not only the price that they purchased for a property, but double that. So let's say you buy a property that's worth $1 million. To get the incentive, you need to put in an additional $1 million into that property. So the overall investment is $2 million. So happy to kind of go into that because it kind of gets a little bit complicated very fast. but that's kind of the high level broad strokes. So before really jumping into the opportunity zone in and of itself and the policies, I kind of want to take a step and look at renter protections, both at the state and the federal level, just because there's this conversation happening that's separate from opportunity zones with moratoriums on renter protections and evictions and rental increases. So in the last few months, there's been two kind of major actions that have taken place, both at the state level and at the federal level. So at the federal level, at the beginning of September, an executive order was passed that was applicable from September 4th to the end of the year. And it provides eviction protections for all renters making less than $99,000 a year for a single person in single household, or $198,000 if you're filing jointly. And if that's for a renter who's unable to pay rent. However, at the beginning of the year, all back due rent will be due.
But Ethan, if I don't want to interrupt, but I think you need to expand just a little bit on the tax consequences, because that's what's driving, in my view, the consequence that we're faced with. You mentioned having to invest at least twice, and more as possible, but at least twice the purchase price. And maybe you could touch a little bit upon the tax consequence of that second $1 million as it pertains to the appreciation of the property.
Yeah, so I'll jump in a little bit. I know Nir is probably a little bit better too at answering some more of the legal side, and I'm going to try to go toe to toe with you, Mayor, on taxes.
Well, no, I don't want you to complicate it that much, because I know a lot about it, but I don't actually. But like I said, they're pretty significant, and more so than just rental assistance. This is kind of a big deal in terms of investors. And I know, having dealt with two now in our opportunity zone, that there are others lurking, if you will, and that could be a good thing, but there are consequences. And I think we need to be aware of those consequences before we headlong into provisions for rent relief, to put it in that context.
And let me make sure I'm saying kind of exactly what I think you're asking. So what I think you're referring to is the capital gains tax.
Yes.
And so essentially, if any capital gains that are accrued from the investment in an opportunity zone, the investor can claim those savings for 10 years. So
well, I mean, after 10 years, there is no capital gains.
Yeah.
So think about that. And just so people are aware, well, I'm summarizing, and you can hold it for lesser periods for a reused benefit. But how do you generate capital gains when it comes to property? You generate capital gains by increasing the fair value of the property. What is the fair value of the property? Fair value of the property is capitalization of rents. So in other words, if your rents quadruple, guess what? Simplifying, the fair value of the property will quadruple. And now suddenly you hold it for 10 years, you've jacked up rents considerably, and the consequence to the investor is no capital gains tax. So guess where the incentive is? The incentive is to substantially increase rents.
Let me just jump in there really quick. There's two components to this, and I don't want to get overly into the weeds about the capital gains. The initial investment, if you think of it like a 1031 real estate transaction, where you take a piece of real estate that you own for a long time and it has a low basis, you are allowed currently under tax law to defer that basis by buying into another property, right, and carry that basis over until you ultimately sell it. And then you're just deferring that piece out. Right. In the opportunity zones, when you invest into an opportunity fund, you can take a low basis investment and invest that into a qualified opportunity fund. If you hold it for, I believe it's 5 years, you get a deferral on that capital gains. I think it's like 5%, 5 or 10%. And then if you hold it for I think it's either 7 years, then it gets to like 15%. So you're not wiping away that initial deferral, that initial capital gains on the initial investment. However, it's the second piece, it's the second component that goes into it, that any gain on that investment from that original basis after that
Right.
So your original basis, if you took $1 million and invested it and your basis was $100,000, you still have to pay capital gains taxes on that initial $1 million investment. It's the gain above and beyond that from that investment that if you hold it for 10 years, that is then, you know, wiped out. Or if you sell it, it's not there. So there's two components to it. I just don't want to think people that can take an investment that has a very low basis right now that they've held forever, invest in this opportunity fund, and 10 years later, they're not paying any capital gains tax because they will.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how detailed you want to get into it, but there's a significant, after a 10-year holding period, elimination of the capital gains that you would recognize on that investment. So the consequence, more than the tax, you know, add and subtract, multiply, the consequence is, as I see it, is that the investor comes in, puts the amount of money in and then substantially increases the rents justified by the money he's put in. I don't object to that. But the consequence, I think there are two we should be aware of. One, the incentive is going to be to increase the rent substantially through the investment. So there's an incentive to do so because the capital gain resulting from that increased fair market value is not taxed. And two, since these properties are going to be substantially improved, which is a good thing. However, I'm somewhat cautious about gentrification.
Yeah, and I think the point that you're making there is incredibly important with how the opportunity zones themselves were designated. So there's a high. Most of the opportunity zones that were designated were specifically to drive investment in the neighborhood. So they're very ripe for the potential for gentrification if there's not active effort to try to mitigate those effects. So I think kind of the point that you're making is actually what I'm trying to hit at on this slide, which is especially now as it relates to the shelter in place and COVID-19. What I have up on the screen right now is analysis that was conducted by the Urban Institute a few months ago, trying to identify areas of the city or areas of the United States that fall under high potential for rental assistance need, and what they're calling an emergency rental assistance priority index. So what they've done is they've essentially taken a bunch of different indicators, both in terms of housing instability and risk, COVID-19 impact, and indicators within COVID-19, as well as equity indicators, and compared census tracts within California against themselves. And as you can see, our opportunity zone, which is kind of the darkest blue area on the map here, falls within the 99th percentile California-wide in terms of the most at risk for rental assistance, for evictions, for all the kind of externalities associated with the impacts of COVID-19 and the impacts of the shelter in place. And this information is also kind of carried out with additional information that we're collecting at the local level as well. So if you recall, in April, the City Council passed and authorized the use of our CDBG funds for emergency rental assistance at the county level. So what I did is I took all that information, put it on a map to kind of see where this is happening. And there's two kind of main things that stick out. One, about 49% of those applications in April. So this is of April. This isn't ongoing. This is just that one indicator that we had from April. 49% of those applications were coming from our opportunity zone. The remaining 51% were citywide. So there's a massive need here. There's also some glaring indicators that there is potential for evictions, for rental issues that are happening in our opportunity zone. So I mentioned it briefly in the background materials that were sent out, but I want to take a little bit of time to kind of talk specifically to some of the policy metrics that Jim brought up. So for the last few months, staff, we've been working to put together a potential rental relocation assistance package to try to mitigate some of the potential concerns that the mayor brought up surrounding gentrification and displacement that may occur within the opportunity zone. So what we did is we looked at a bunch of other jurisdictions nearby and tried to put together an increase in what our current rental relocation assistance is on par with what we're seeing in other jurisdictions. So right now, our current rental relocation is capped at 2 months leased rent. So what that means is whatever your lease says, if you get displaced for a no-fault eviction, so something like an owner move-in or a substantial rehab or a demolition of the property, all things that are highly likely within an opportunity zone, you would get 2 months, whatever it says on your lease, as the relocation assistance that would be paid from the property owner to help move you out. What we've been looking at is kind of based upon a bunch of different areas, and I'll kick over some of the legal implications of this to Nero if you have questions about it. But what we looked at is looking at cities like San Francisco, LA, Oakland, Berkeley. We put together what an assistance package that includes both a base relocation and a supplemental relocation payments. So what do I mean by that? So the first piece would be a base relocation payment, which should be paid to all renters that are a part of that no-fault eviction. And that would include a first month rent payment, a security deposit payment, which is reflected as 2 months your rent, and then estimated moving expenses. Now, one big difference in what's in the ordinance, it's in our current ordinance, is that what the rent would be considered would either be known as the fair market rate, which is put out annually by HUD, or your lease rent, whichever is higher. And so the idea there would be, there's going to be instances where a person's lease rent is substantially below market rate. And for them to go from their current lease rent to a market rate rent, there's going to be a major delta there. In addition to the base relocation payment, we also wanted to provide some additional supplemental relocation payments if the property meets specific characteristics. So the first one would be a temporary housing payment. So the idea there would be if a person is displaced before the end of the month, they would receive a per diem at $150 to help for that temporary housing, whether that's in an Airbnb or that's a hotel or a motel. The idea there is that there's money there because it's very difficult to find a permanent housing solution midway through a month. Additionally, households that either have a child, somebody who's 18 or under, a household with an individual that's 65 years or older, or a household with somebody with an individual with a disability, they would receive an additional 1 month payment to help with their relocation. And then finally, because there's also an administrative cost to operating this program, there would be an administrative fee that's also charged per unit. And that would increase based upon the size of the property. And the rationale behind increase at the size of the property is the more households that are displaced, the harder it is going to be. It's exponentially harder to find households to put them into, to find supplemental housing for them. Now, ultimately, the idea would be that this administrative fee is not solely going to the city. It would be some money would go to help pay for legal assistance and other kind of third-party assistance to help find that housing and to provide legal advice and education for the tenants that are also being displaced. So ultimately, kind of what we were hoping to talk about a little bit today in the study session was kind of looking a little bit at the rental relocation assistance to get some feedback on this, as well as having a larger conversation regarding the opportunity zone and kind of the tax basis that the mayor brought up as well.
What confuses me a little bit, yeah, Ethan, and so maybe you can help me. You're talking about the rental relocation. I need reassurance that we're talking specifically about opportunities zone and not throughout the city, because throughout the city, it's a different circumstance. Are you just talking about opportunity zone, or are you talking more generally throughout the city?
So right now, we're just talking about rental relocation. That's kind of a question that we would love to throw back to the city council to have a conversation around that.
That's my question. I don't think you've answered my question, which was, are you talking solely about those situations within an opportunity zone, or are you talking more broadly throughout the city?
So Mayor, I could jump in on that. I think where this policy recommendation that you're seeing today came from was through conversations with you and the vice mayor that were specifically focused on the opportunity zone. It does come up as a question, though, of, do you want us to be applying it outside the opportunity zone or not? So at this point, we're just talking about the opportunity zone. If we get direction that it should go beyond that, then we'll work with that as well. But that was our starting point.
Yeah, and I'm not interested in that at this point in time, or I'm not, because the dynamic of the opportunity zone is an investor buys a property, drops a ton of money on the property, and then immediately doubles, triples rent. That's the dynamic, as opposed to many others that are, 5% increase, 5% increase, 5% increase. The dynamic is completely different. And that's what concerns me, is that dynamic, which is artificial. I would address to John, it's artificial because it's tax incentive. And it's not just normal economic circumstances, conditions, because it's incentivized through the tax measures. And therefore, I think that we're entitled to recognize the difference and the impact on our community and have a more, I don't want to use generous, but maybe a more appropriate consequence to those, particularly with families that are suddenly finding their rents tripled because of the investment, and there's no way they can pay that. So now what do? That's different than a gradual increase.
So Mayor, just to underscore what City Manager Schutz has said, I think one reason we wanted to have a study session was I do want to hear from, well, let Ethan finish and hear from Neera as well, the legal implications, but to actually have a conversation about what it would look like if we were to extend the policy beyond the OZ. So I know you've seen that a little differently. We're coming at different angles, but I think that was one of the reasons we wanted to have the study session tonight, to get everyone.
I'll grant you that, but I've been talking about this thing now for I don't know how long, and I want to make sure that it applies to the opportunity zone, because that's, believe it or not, you should, well, I'm sure you recognize that's a dynamic. And I've dealt with two of these now, and it's unpleasant to have the superintendent come in and the families come in to talk about suddenly their rents going, like I said, triple in some cases. That's boom in your face right now because of the tax incentive. And frankly, that's something I think we need to address specifically. I don't know more broadly. Frankly, I didn't start more broadly. So I want to make sure, I'm going to insist upon that we specifically address the opportunity zone. And the other is the other, but let's not get sidetracked too much, because we have the only opportunity zone in the whole county in our city. And frankly, I followed a little bit, and I know in other cities, this is what's occurring. I don't know if anybody else has, but that's what's taking place. So anyway, sorry for the interruption there, Ethan, but I just want to make sure we're on track with regard to, and we can touch, as Kate mentioned, we can touch on the other, but I don't want to, like I said, I want to get too diverse at this point in time, quite frankly. And I'll be a little insistent, because I've asked for this for some time now to be on the agenda. So we can talk about it, but let's make sure we cover this consequence in some detail. So go ahead, Nathan.
I actually think I'm done. So I'm going to stop sharing so that kind of we get back to the grid view.
Hey, Ethan, really quick question. So the renter's assistance payments that would be direct payments via the landlord to the person being displaced, what's the taxable issue on the receipt of that income from the landlord to the tenant? Do they have to report that? Is there, I would think that they're, when relocation assistance comes out in any other form, be it corporate or whatnot, it's a taxable issue to the recipient, and corporations gross it up.
An opinion, but it would be taxable to the recipient.
Yeah.
I to be honest, I don't know. That's a great question. I can look into it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's taxable.
Yeah. So I mean, making sure that when we're discussing these types of programs, that we all understand that while someone making $198,000 a year as a couple, could be and giving them another $10,000, you could technically get another, half of that going to taxes that they might not be aware of. So just making sure that if we're going down these roads, that we have all of those pieces in a line so that everybody understands the ramifications of it.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So Mayor, that concludes the PowerPoint and our presentation. I'm not sure if you want to take public input from the people that are here from the community first, or if you want to do council questions, whichever is your pleasure.
Well, it was a good presentation as usual, and thanks for doing so, along with the write-up. I don't know if but let's start with council question. We'll go to public and then circle back. So council questions, unfortunately, I can only see John and let's see, I can see Vice Mayor Collin, but that's it. So I can't tell if the others are, maybe you can help.
Those are the only people that matter anyway. So
I'll kick off with a question, and then if other people are raising their hand. So,
all right, go ahead.
So thank you for that presentation. And as you might all know, the mayor and I have seen this presentation before, and there's a lot of data. Each time I hear something different, so thank you. One thing that we talked about in a previous meeting, and I'd love Neera to speak to it, is the whole disparate impact. And I understand that we are very much looking at opportunity zone and trying to look at policy there. But I know, everyone on this call can look at that both and looking at what it would look like if it was extended. And I know there were some legal implications that were compelling to me that I don't think you really touched on, Ethan, and I'd like, if Neera is okay, to talk to that.
Yeah, thank you, council member. I'm happy to speak to that. We had looked into the issue of disparate impacts as it related to a question of whether or not these potential relocation assistance payments would be made just in the canal and the opportunity zone area or citywide. And the Supreme Court has articulated, our US Supreme Court has articulated a test for disparate impacts when contributing a policy or establishing a policy that would have a negative impact on a protected class. And what the Supreme Court has said, it lays out a three-part test. One part of the test is there a policy or practice of the public agency which will have a negative impact on a protected class? The second part of the analysis is whether or not that the policy or practice could have been accomplished in a less impactful way. And the third part is a rebuttable presumption that we don't need to get into right now. For us here, because we believe the statistics show that the policy of applying a relocation assistance payment just in the opportunity zone would actually benefit what could potentially be a protected class based on racial demographics, or could be a class that is more in need of financial assistance based on what the statistics of the opportunity zone have established, that it's highly unlikely that there would be a feasible argument that the city would be violate the disparate impact doctrine by not applying the relocation assistance citywide.
Thank you. That was my question. Mayor,
I've got
there's Andrew. I was about to say, I don't see anyone else waving their hand, but there.
Yeah, no, I've got a couple questions if I might, and I'll ask them all, and then Ethan, you can respond. I assume that what we're talking about when we speak of remedies, specifically relocation payments, these would apply only to residential tenancies. I'm assuming that's the case. And would there be exceptions, or you're looking at best practices in other jurisdictions, do they carve out exceptions so that if, for example, there's a renovation of the building and tenants are invited to return at the same or a comparable rate, are they still on the hook for the relocation assistance? And then also, I'm assuming that a no-fault eviction includes an eviction that arises from a month-to-month tenancy where the landlord and the tenant both have the right to terminate the tenancy on 30 days notice. I'm assuming that constitutes a no-fault eviction.
Yep, so I'm gonna look at Neera a little bit because some of the no-fault eviction questions, as well as kind of the nuances of that, can get very complicated very fast, especially with some state laws. So I'll try to give like a quick little overview, Neera, and then I'll kick it off to you. So I think the first piece, as of right now, we are only looking at residential, but I think that's also an open question. The second piece with the exceptions, yes, some jurisdictions do look at exceptions and kind of offering a first right of refusal. There are complications to that. So kind of what is the market rate rent? Kind of some of those questions do present themselves. And then finally, with the no fault evictions, at that point, I'm going to kick it off to Nir because I think she has a better kind of grasp of all that.
Yeah, so it's a good question. The backdrop to all of this is AB 1482, which you may know about, which became effective on January 1st of this year. And AB 42 did primarily two things. One, it established a statewide rent control for properties built more than 15 years ago. And that 15 years is a rolling date. So today we're on 2005. Next year we'll be on 2006. That's one thing 1482 did. The other thing 1482 did is establish make any eviction, which is not a no-fault eviction, illegal. So said a little simpler, that means landlords can no longer evict tenants in California unless those evictions are no fault. And 1482 establishes what no fault is. And no fault is an owner move-in, a withdrawal of the property from the rental market, and an intent to substantially rehabilitate or demolish the property such that the tenants must move out. That's it, and complying with a court order. That's it for no fault evictions. And because 1482 applies statewide, we are, as a city, are subject to 1482 and its mandate. 1482 did allow local jurisdictions to establish what they call more protective mechanisms for tenants. That what more protective is has not been litigated, but we have studied that extensively. And what I believe it could mean is that we could establish additional relocation assistance, meaning more pay than what 1482 establishes, or have the relocation assistance apply to more types of tenants than 1482 applies to. But we cannot establish a category, we cannot add to a category of no fault evictions.
So
said another way, we can't, I'm sorry, council member, said another way, we can't recodify what constitutes a statewide no fault eviction. Sorry.
understood, but just to make sure that I'm on the same page, are you saying that month-to-month tenancies, as they previously existed, no longer exist to allow a no-fault eviction?
Yeah, so 1482 says that you have to, that's a good, I understand what you're saying, I'm sorry. Once a month-to-month tenancy terminates, which is at the end of the month, then relocation assistance payments under 1482 are not required. And the termination of that tenancy is not considered an eviction.
So it strikes me that's a giant loophole here, because landlords will simply allow the leased premises to go month to month, and then on 30 days notice, they'll boot people out and there's no relocation obligation, payment obligation.
Well, there still has to be a lawful basis for removing the tenants at the end of the month to month, and certain month to month tenancies include those bases, which would be that the month to month tenancy continues up until a certain time, and then there's a right to release the tenant. With month to month tenancies that continue without any termination date, then yes, those would be subject to the eviction procedure, the eviction clauses of 1482.
Thank you.
Well, what I'd kind of like to do, quite frankly, is maybe take a different tact on this. Because 1482, frankly, I'm not knowledgeable on 1482 and pros and cons and one thing or another. I'd like us to focus on what it is we're trying to accomplish, and then let you guys, the attorney guys, figure out how the heck we do it. And once we establish what it is we're trying to achieve, then the task is to determine whether or not we can isolate that on opportunity zone, which would be my preference, because I can see the consequence that much more drastic. And it certainly doesn't shortchange the investor. So I don't feel like we're imposing upon a potential investor, but recognizing the situation that's being created by this tax law. And rather than sort of try to sort out what's legal, what's not, and frankly, we're going to get all tangled up, it seems to me. Having said that, maybe we should get some public input, preserve a little bit of time for summaries. So if it's okay with you, we'll go to public comment. Again, I can't see Maribeth. Are you okay with that? I'm sorry, I can't see you on my screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to jump ahead of you there. So Lindsay, could you bring the public in for comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if you're attending over Zoom, which everyone on this call is, if you go ahead and press the participants button, if you're on a computer, you'll see a raise hand feature. Go ahead and select the raise hand. And if you're on your phone, there should just be a little raise hands button at the bottom left-hand corner of your phone, if you would like to provide public comment on this item. And I'm going to go ahead and set a 2-minute timer. Sometimes you won't be able to hear the timer. So since all of you can see the screen, I'm just going to go ahead and hold my phone up when you have about 5 seconds left. And Grace.
Lindsay, if you admonish that, I'm going to go mute. So if you.
Yeah, perfect. And Grace, you'll be allowed to speak.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to express my thoughts about the opportunity zones and the rental relocation assistance. I guess I'm just pretty concerned about the opportunity zones as we, talked about before, particularly given the impending eviction crisis with COVID and everything. I think it's great that we're looking at relocation assistance, and I'm not sure how much power you guys have over the actual investing happening in the area. So, I'm kind of new to learning about this. So I'm just would like to say, I'm glad you're thinking about how this is going to kind of deepen the eviction crisis. And I'd rather, see us take preventative measures if it's possible rather than reactive measures like the eviction assistance, although it's great that you're looking at expanding it. So yeah, I'll kind of, stay tuned as you continue to discuss this, but I just wanted to share my thoughts. Thank you.
I'm not sure, am I on?
Yes, you are. Sorry, I was muted. Go ahead and you're welcome to provide your 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Judith Bloomberg with Congregation Rhoda Shalom, City of Santa Fe resident. I appreciate you're doing this study session, and along with Mayor Phillips, I think you need to look long and hard. The jury is out on how beneficial opportunity zones are in reality. They tend to be wealth generation mechanisms for the uber wealthy. And as Mayor Phillips said, this council needs to take a deep breath, because the stories that we hear, notwithstanding relocation assistance, it is meaningless if you are a resident in the canal living multiple families in an apartment. It is not going to mean anything. So I think that the study session is definitely worthwhile. But I think, as I said, that we need to take a deep breath here, because it is quite complicated and the jury is out as to how beneficial opportunities zones are in the long term. Thank you.
All right, Omar.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for your leadership in this issue. I think it's very important. The local government is on top of this type of issues that could have a major impact in our communities. as you know, the opportunity zone are not required to demonstrate specific benefits to the existing low-income residents. The opportunity zone investments are not concerned with local priorities or public interest, and nothing in the opportunity zone legislation requires them to be. So I share the concerns the Mayor Fields is bringing to the group to create some policies that can provide some protections to those residents. In fact, there are some cities they have considered the hiring people, they understand the complexity of this financial tool. And I'm wondering if the city of San Rafael is along those lines, because we need to be on top of it. You know, we cannot allow for these private investments to come and take control of our communities. As you know, the tool itself is not gonna do the work that was intended to bring good to stressed communities. It will require these local policies and local initiatives that will reshape the investments that will come to our community. So I think my question is, well, thank you. And my question is, are you considering adding more capacity at the staff level? They understand these issues so that we can be on top of it. Thank you.
All right, this is one more call. If anyone would like to provide public comments, please raise your hand now. I see no more hands raised, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate the comments and thanks for the help on that. So let's bring it back to this group for comment. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Andrew Henning, but I'm always interested in your viewpoints. So if you have a comment ready, please share it with us. If not, we'll pass.
I guess, well, as you said at the beginning, I mean, this is something that we've been looking at for a long time. And I think it was acquisitions and the subsequent rent increases in the opportunity zone that even led to our original renter protections that went into place over a year ago. So this is certainly an area that I think has been a priority for a while. And I think I'll just say this, obviously I'll leave it to you to make a decision on whether or not to pass the policy. I would say that my experience with our renter protections overall over the last year in terms of kind of administering that program is that whatever we pass, I think it needs to be clear and understandable for actually property owners or investors, because a lot of the questions that I receive in administering the program, it's less from tenants and more from landlords that are trying to effectively implement our program. So I think if the spirit of this is to essentially create, some extra fees and costs that would potentially disincentivize some of the activity that we don't want to see, I think we just want to make it very clear up front, how is that going to play out if I buy this? Because I think that could be a lot of the administrative aspect of dealing with this program. But overall, I think as others have said, I think this is a really important policy because the gentrification is happening and it's only going to accelerate with policies like this.
And I'll just say thanks so much for your comment. I always appreciate your viewpoints. And certainly clarity is always desirable. Having said that, in talking with Attorney Black that was involved in the two in our opportunity zone, these are pretty sophisticated investors. And it's not just mom and top buying 1 or 2 units down the pike. We have 75 potential. And so I suspect they can follow most of what we might put together. Valid concern, but I'm not too uptight about it, to be honest with you. But thanks for your sage comments.
Of course, yeah.
Thanks. Other comments? Again, I'm Maribeth, did you have a comment?
I do.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I thought you might.
I do. It's partially a question as well, but I'll start with sort of my inclinations. This seems very complex and very expensive, and seems to be targeted at sort of undoing some of the consequences of an opportunity zone. And I'm wondering if it might be cleaner to just get the opportunity zone designation revoked so that we so rather than trying to come up with some way to mitigate the harm that it's causing, why don't we just get the opportunity zone designation lifted? And if we either can't or don't want to do that, I'm wondering about the balance of the benefits. Looking at San Rafael, you know, if the thought is that the opportunity zone is going to bring us benefits, why are we out there trying to undo it with regard to residential tenants? It seems to me that because of these costs, I mean, this is this is going to $10,000 or $15,000 per unit to the cost. If what we want is renovated buildings, that amount in total is enough to destroy a pro forma, and the building renovation isn't going to go forward. If that's what we want, and I would be puzzled as to the rationale behind that, why don't we just go after what's causing it in the first place? So I guess I see a complicated circle here that I'd rather undo than dive in on.
Good comments, and I'll just comment, and certainly Ethan and anyone else can chime in. Valid concern, except these are so unique from a tax standpoint. The 15,000, well, I haven't run a pro forma. I don't think that's a major factor when you talk about forgiving capital gains on substantial numbers after a holding period. So the incentive is there. And in talking with an attorney that was involved in these other two, my impression was, not a specific question, my impression was that's quite frankly not a factor. So what my intention was to get out ahead of this, because we've had two already, and legal aid came in and we negotiated some expanded terms, one thing or another, but I can see it happening again with 75 possible units and the opportunity zone there once the economy settles down. I can see it happening, so I'd much prefer to get out ahead of this issue, recognizing some of those consequences. That's the motivation. Now, you've raised a very good question, and that is, do we wish to, I'm not sure it's totally at our discretion, but let's assume for the moment that it is. Do we want to keep the opportunity zone in place or not? The advantage is substantial amounts can come in to renovate the area. That's a good thing. The offset is some of the points we've just been discussing, the impact on the individuals that otherwise resided there before all this artificial took place. So I think you raised a really good point as to whether or not we wish to maintain that. Somehow, I'm going to say I know, I've read in Philadelphia and a few other places have said thanks, but no thanks. But that's a good topic. Perhaps it should be discussed, but we have it right now. It's in place. And what I'm trying to do is encourage us to get out ahead of another, consequence, displaced families, school superintendents coming, because in this case, last one, there were, 30 kids who were going to be displaced. Where were they going to go, and the impact on them, and trying to get out ahead of those consequences and recognizing we've got an issue before us. So I would think that would be the first thing, but subpart, I agree, Meredith, your point's well taken. Maybe we ought to look at this because we haven't done that. We've just said, okay, now what do we do? Other comments?
Yeah. Hey, Ethan.
Yeah, John.
You may have mentioned, and I apologize. I can't quickly find it in the attachments, but what is the opportunity? And it's probably the wrong word of it. How many total residential units currently reside in our opportunity zone in comparison to commercial units as well? Because as we know, this doesn't necessarily, I know we're talking about residential, but as Councilmember McCullough brought up, there could be commercial displacements as well in these opportunity zones. So what is the total number of residential units that are currently in the opportunities, the small opportunity zone that is within the canal right now?
I was told, Nathan can update this, but I was told between 75 and 78.
78 total units, is that right?
No. Complexes, if you will. That's not units. But Nathan, maybe you can update Because this was last year, he told me.
Yeah, I'm going from the top of my head, so I'll follow up with like the actual number. But I believe it's about 1,800 households themselves, residential households. The number of commercial is significantly lower because of the boundary of the census tract. But I'll follow up with specifically, but it is an order of magnitude smaller in terms of the commercial units versus the residential units.
What are you defining as a household?
The census household number. So whatever the census says is what I'm using. I can pull it up.
So you could have multiple households in a single unit. Is that correct? No.
So it's a unit itself. A residential housing unit would be a household.
And again, and it would be nice to know how many buildings we're talking about. Like if each building has 180 units and there's 10 buildings, there's your 1,800 units. But if a building is 5 units and there's a bunch of those, I don't know the makeup in that specific opportunity zone of what would be impacted and how many of these actual buildings. If 4 buildings get sold, is that all 1,800 units, or is there 30 buildings there?
Well, again, I think there's 75. At least that's my impression I have. And the 2 that came up a year ago, I'll say, they were probably, I don't recall the exact number, but I'm going to say probably 30 units in each one. Because there has to be, there has to be a certain size for it to make economic sense to pull something like this off. So they're the apartment units, apartment buildings, if you will.
No, I understand that. I mean, it's again, but typically, just in my experience, that the larger real estate investment trusts and larger corporate investors are not going for the 30 to 40 unit buildings. They're going for the 300 to 400 to 1,000 unit buildings. And
if they're in an opportunity zone, and they may not be in an opportunity zone. I mean, that's the added kicker. I will say that the attorney that I talked with from Walnut Creek that was involved in these 2 said, it sounds nice. San Rafael is prime time when it comes to these. And he thought there was a pent-up demand of about $5 billion. And looking at, so we're in the gun sights, if you will, with regard to more units being converted in San Rafael. His reasoning was, and I think it's solid, it's nice climate, city's well run. I think he might have been patronizing, but that's what he said. It's close to San Francisco and other points of employment. So this is, particularly if you talk about gentrification, we are a bedroom community. Now, maybe that's changed, and I'll grant you that in some cases it has, but that's what I was told about a year ago. So San Rafael is very desirable.
So I looked it up real quick, and I got to give myself a pat on the back. It's 1,813 households. Very
close. How many unique facilities is that?
I think it's closer to 100. I'll double check. I think it's between like 100 and 120, but I have that data. And
I know Paul gave me 75 to 78 a year ago. So it's somewhere in that range, let's say. Probably doesn't matter too much. We are getting close to 7 o'clock, bewitching hour. Where do we go? This thing's been kicking around forever. I'm a little frustrated.
Gary, this is Andrew. If I could share my thoughts, I would be interested in pursuing or looking more closely at remedies such as relocation assistance. The thing about the study session, though, like many study sessions, is it provokes a lot more questions than we can possibly answer right now.
Right.
But I think that it's worth going out and doing a deeper dive now and understanding, to Mary Beth's point, what are some of the possible unintended consequences if we move forward with fashioning a limited remedy without looking at the much larger picture. And that seems to be kind of the consistent theme among the members of the public who spoke. To Omar's point, do we need greater capacity or expertise looking at the full range of issues posed by opportunity zones? And then also to Judith and the other members' point, what ability do we have to prevent an opportunity zone from going forward? I thought that we were preempted, but if there's a way to deny an opportunity zone from being exploited, even though it's a creation of federal law, then I'm interested in exploring that too. But I think there's much more work to be done here, but I'm interested in looking for remedies, fashioning remedies, if only to ensure that we protect the most vulnerable of the people involved in this new drama.
And I would certainly agree with that. And the clock's been running. I said, trying to get out ahead of this. Who knows when this might occur next, and trying to get out in front of that. So while the staff is going full blast on a million things, I know, I would like to consider this a higher priority than perhaps it has been to this point, if the council concurs. Sounds like it. Look, by the head nods, it looks like it to me.
Concur.
Okay. Jim, how do we conclude?
I think we have what we need. I've written down, we want to clarify the makeup of the number of units and total buildings, and we really want to look at unintended consequences. Maybe even do a little simple like pro forma of what would this do to a project with and without these requirements, and whether or not, you know, there's a mechanism to eliminate an opportunity zone. All the things that have come up, we can certainly look at. I think my thought is just one of urgency, Mayor. I know you're looking for this to come back very quickly to the council. The fastest way we could do that is we could bring you an actual ordinance to take action on. Although based on this conversation, under normal circumstances, I would feel like the council is not quite ready for an ordinance to take an action on, that you'd rather see the answers to these questions, maybe see what a draft ordinance would look like and give us feedback on that. That's what it feels like based on listening to you, but we could do it a different way and just try to create an ordinance and bring it back as soon as we can, if that's what you're directing us to do.
Well, I would suggest we want to do this right. And while it seems to be, quite frankly, dragging, it is complex. And I think the community wants to do this right. So that would be my driver. Ultimately ordinances, but not right away if we're not prepared to do so. But I defer to other, particularly under these circumstances, to other council members' preferences or preference. John?
I'm okay with that. And I think I follow along with Councilmember McCullough's direction there and what we need to look at. I would just add one more question to Nira and the city attorney's office, is that when we look on both sides of the equation, just the information that we can come out, do we open ourselves, whatever we do we open ourselves up to anything from the opposing side or the opposite side, the landlord side, of inhibiting their ability to handle an asset that they own in a certain way? I mean, I just want to make sure that I'm for going forward to protect folks, you know, that desperately need our protection, but I also don't want to open the other side of an equation that puts the city at risk. So I don't know enough to make a decision, obviously, at this point, and getting that information would be very helpful.
Yeah, certainly good points. Let's see. Kate, I can't see you. I apologize. Well, I guess I apologize. Not too much.
No, it's good. I think we put everything on. Yeah, we put everything on the table. I think, and I agree with you, Mayor. We need to get the additional information and do this right. And I actually thought we were preempted from removing it. So that actually was like, what? I mean, I would love to have clarity around that. I mean, maybe we decide this isn't the right thing for us if that is an avenue. So I'd be very interested in hearing what staff learns on that.
Yeah, that would be an interesting debate because I can see both sides of that, quite frankly. Okay, with that, if it's okay with everyone, at least everyone that I can see, we shall close the study session. Thanks, everybody. Particularly Ethan, for once again providing us good information from which we can build upon, and comments by the council members. So thank you so much. We are now closed. See ya. Thanks. Open session in about 10 seconds.